Welcome to Half Hour with Billy the Kid. My name is Scott Mantz. I'm going to be moderating this conversation for the next 30 minutes with creator, showrunner, executive producer Michael Hirst and Billy the Kid himself, aka William H. Bonney, Tom Blyth. Welcome, gentlemen, to this conversation.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for having us.
I just want to start off the conversation by asking Michael, why a Billy the Kid series, which is unlike anything we have ever seen on Billy the Kid?
Well, I think there's never been an authentic portrait of Billy the Kid. The quintessential outlaw, really. And I think previous depictions, I haven't seen them all. I never want to be influenced by anything else, but they've relied, as far as I can see, upon old tropes and easy cliches about, a psychopathic killer and a wild kid. And I wanted to, because when I was a kid myself, I for some reason that I'm still not sure why, I loved Billy the Kid. I was 7 or 8 and on my way to school, pretending I was riding a gray horse and the posse the sheriff and the posse were pursuing me. And I don't think I'd ever seen anything on film or TV at that stage, but I'd read books, I guess, or comics or something. And I loved the idea of Billy the Kid. And I guess that I wanted to find out whether my hero worship was worth it. What there was about this guy that could be interesting. And I did a lot of research, I did a lot of reading. And out of this reading, research, emerged a completely different character, a completely different Billy. Not the psychopathic killer, but a guy who loved his mummy, a guy who had a beautiful singing voice, a guy who said himself he was more sinned against than sinning, a very sensitive young man who had a moral compass derived from his mother, Kathleen, Irish immigrant, devout Catholic. And all these things contributed to demythologize Billy, but at the same time, the killer Billy, but at the same time to create a new mythology, a more truthful, I think. And I went back to his roots to try and find out who Billy was. So for me, it was a very personal show. It's much more personal. Of course, I love doing Vikings and Tudors, but this was closer to home for me because it connected me to my own childhood.
Well, let's take a look now at a clip from Billy the Kid on Epix.
Tell me you're looking out for someone.
Got several names. William H. Bonney, Kid Antrim, and Billy the Kid.
My family came to America on the promise of fair treatment for all.
You have been arrested for murder.
It was self-defense.
I like outlaws.
Believe me, I really do not want to kill you. Make sure he gets a decent burial.
So Tom, in my life, what I knew about Billy the Kid, he's an icon from the Old West, gunslinger, outlaw, and boy, is he so much more than that. What struck you in your research, in your preparation to play Billy, that really just knocked your socks off about Billy?
I remember when I first saw the first 2 episodes, I believe, that kind of came through when I was in the process of auditioning, and obviously read them with a keen, close eye. And my first instinct was that I was like, he's made all this up. There's no way that Billy the Kid was this cool, as well as being this kind of outlaw and this kind of like multifaceted and had this much depth. And then sure enough, I started doing my own research and realized that not only has Michael not made it up, but he's uncovering things that a lot of previous iterations haven't uncovered before and haven't focused on. Because it's really easy to talk about Billy the gunslinger, Billy the outlaw, Billy the criminal. And he was all those things. But when you take a closer look at why he was those things, that's when you really get the human story, I think. That's when you get the more interesting, humanized depth in the story. And I think that's what this show does so well. So for me, it was incredible to learn all these kind of versions of Billy, the many hats that he wore metaphorically. You know, he was a singer and he was a lover and a charmer. By all reports, like could be very funny and then in the drop of a hat, you know, flip and get very angry very quickly when he had to defend someone's honor or his own kind of rights. And he was also, like Michael said, a mommy's boy. He loved his mom and he learned a lot from her. And all of these things were just such a treat to delve into, because it's easy to play someone who's a criminal. That's kind of a one-note thing. But it's really fascinating as an actor and as just a kind of a lover of history and a lover of storytelling, to get such a multifaceted kind of balanced character who has so many kind of faces that he wears for different obstacles that he has to overcome. And Michael's writing does such justice to that. He does such an amazing job of pulling out all those little strings and like looking at the whole thread of what makes the man. And I feel very lucky and very fortunate to be trusted by Michael with this character.
I got to tell you, Tom, when I was watching the series, I was thinking to myself, oh, there must have been like, there's no way Billy was all these things. It's got to be for like entertainment.
Right.
Like, so then I go back and I do my research and I'm like, well, what do you know?
Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah. It's a common thing, actually, that people think they know something about someone famous. Like, you know, people thought they knew about Vikings, but I knew they knew almost nothing about the Vikings, the real Vikings. And similarly, if you said Billy, it has the advantage of having an immediate visceral impact. You say Billy the Kid, millions of people around the world can react to that. You know, they've heard the name. It summons up many, many things. But unfortunately, what it summons up usually are bad things, you know, criminalities and so on. So I wanted to address that, but it was still an advantage.
Mm-hmm. You know, Tom, like when you like had the opportunity to go after this kind of role, like what was that process like for you? Like take us through your process to like convince these producers and convince Michael, like, I am your Billy.
I just gave them every cent I had in the bank and bribed my way. No, I which I was fresh out of drama school at the time, so apparently they're cheap. No, I honestly felt like a kindred spirit with him from day one. The moment I read the script, it's odd. Michael and I kind of joke about this. We're both kind of two people who were brought up in Yorkshire, in England, north of England, and there's kind of, you know, no reason why we should be so drawn to this character if you look at it on paper. But we both have been from a young age. I was very drawn to Westerns in general and all the kind of outlaws. I didn't know much about Billy. I'd heard his name and I'd read kind of, you know, synopses about him. But the moment I read the script, I felt this kind of, not to get too woo-woo about it, but I kind of felt him kind of descend on me a little bit, and something felt right about it. And that's like once in a blue moon. You know, you go out for parts all the time as an actor, and you have meetings and you audition. And then every now and again, if you're lucky, one comes across your email inbox and just makes total sense to you. And this was one of those. And so, you know, there was a bunch of auditions and meetings with Otto and Donald and Michael, and you know, it was during the height of COVID. So I was living in upstate New York in a cabin, and I was kind of literally chopping wood every day to feed this fire in this little cabin that I was renting, and kind of living like a slightly frontier experience. So there were so many kind of, you know, magical moments where it felt like it was written in the stars a little bit. But really, first and foremost, it was just like, I loved this character. I really did. And I was kind of willing to do whatever it took to bring him to life. And thankfully, I think Michael and Otto and Donald saw that I loved this character.
Yeah, Michael, I want to ask, like, when you were filming and, you know, and Tom was in character, and what was that like for you and for your filmmakers, your producing team, your directors, when you saw Tom in action and when you just went like,
well, let me take you back a little to, I mean, Tom was actually one of the first actors to kind of throw his hat into the ring. And he did say he had felt a great close communion to Billy, which I, in a way, would expect him to say because he wanted the job, the other amazing thing at the time was that I thought he looked very much like Billy, and that's quite extraordinary in its own way. It may be meaningless, it may not be, but it was something that stayed in my mind. And then, Tom did readings and we talked about the character and so on. And the more that we talked and the more I saw of him, I totally began to believe that he did feel a deep empathy and did understand what I was trying to do, because what I was trying to do, obviously, as I've said, was to make a more empathetic Billy, to make a more sensitive Billy, someone who had immigrant parents, who'd had a tough life, who was brought up by a very Catholic mother, who was very, very sensitive young man with a moral compass. And not a killer, with a hard face, someone whose emotions would be on their face. And Tom has that, and extremely sensitive. So that was a huge plus. I still try to throw rocks in the past, say, well, Billy had this beautiful singing voice, played musical instruments. And 2 days later, Tom sent me a tape where he's playing a guitar and singing beautifully, and that experience, certainly for a writer, and presumably for an actor too, is a transcending experience. That here I'm writing about someone who is alive, who is going to be saying these things I'm writing. I've got to make sure that I'm giving them lines that reflect the fact that he's a living person, Oh, yeah. And he can come back to me and say, I'm not saying that line. Well, I wouldn't say, it's a symbiotic. It's a very creative relationship.
I will say Michael's being very gracious and graceful. He put up with a lot of late night emails from me kind of musing over the script and agonizing over certain beats and saying, does this work? Can I say this? Is this right? Can I change it to this sometimes? So I'm very grateful that he put up with my enthusiasm, which sometimes came across probably quite intense.
Well, I was to some extent, I was used to dealing with that, because when we made Elizabeth, Kate Blanchett, the one day she came in, she's very young at the time, Kate. She came and said, and she had never read anything about Elizabeth when we started shooting. But then one day she came in and said, I've just been reading about Elizabeth the first. And she said this amazing speech. And I want to say this amazing speech. And I have to say, it's not a documentary. It's a drama, and yeah, if I was doing a documentary, you would say that speech. But it's my Elizabeth. It is based on fact and who she was, but reimagined. So Billy the Kid was reimagined. And Tom, there was a period of time when he'd been reading a lot and was excited, and I appreciate that, because that's the beginning of getting involved, being excited. But my job is to get the actor to focus on what is real. What is real is actually in the script.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Well, let's take a look right now at another scene from Billy the Kid.
George Coe told me that someone in the store was asking to speak to Mr. Tunstall yesterday. I thought it might be you.
Might have been.
Mr. Tunstall's away. But if you want, you can go and meet his lawyer, Mr. McSween. He can give you a good account of what's actually happening here in Lincoln.
What is actually happening here in Lincoln, Charlie? Because everybody around here seems to have their own angle on it. What's yours?
Well, I think we're on the verge of a big war. A war between Murphy and Tunstall. And as far as I can see, one side is right, and the other side is plain wrong.
I agree to meet with McSween. It has to be in secret. No one can know about it. You can tell McSween. It's just a friendly visit. Not ready to commit to anything. I still work for Murphy. I got friends in that camp. They're dangerous people, Charlie. more dangerous than you know.
So Tom, as fate would have it, all that time you spent in the cabin chopping wood was kind of getting you ready for this role. And once you got it, what prep did you really have to do to really get the gunslinging and the twirling of the gun and riding a horse and you know, dealing with the elements of being out in the open like that?
Again, I mean, Scott, you hit the nail on the head. It's a lot of it is elemental. It's like, for me, becoming a character is very much about kind of changing your energy, your metabolism almost. And so that, for me, that starts with, at least with someone like Billy, who lives outdoors, he sleeps under the stars, he rides a horse every single day, sometimes for 8 hours a day. You know, he carries a gun on his hip, which weighs something. He's used to holding a rifle. All these things, he's used to manual labor. All these things that change your metabolism, they change how you hold yourself, how you speak, your energy. And so really, like, I mean, I did do a lot of reading, as Michael said, because luckily there's a lot of history out there, a lot of contrasting history often, and you have to kind of filter out what is your belief about who Billy was. But eventually the books, you get to a point as an actor, at least, where the books are only so useful, and you really do have to trust what's on the page, and also, you know, get into the body of him. So I learned to ride. I didn't ride before. I had two very less than expert experiences riding before, and so I learned to ride in about 3.5 weeks, really, 4 weeks in total, and then learned to kind of, you know, handle the guns safely and efficiently, and also kind of with the showmanship that Billy is reported to have had, and all these things. The more I did, the more I found kind of my center of gravity just lowering and getting kind of lower and lower. You know, I'm kind of a city kid from England, so you know, there's a transformation that has to happen for it to be believable. And you know, his voice, I kind of played with what it means to grow up out on the prairies with like dust coming in your mouth, and so I kind of played with this idea that he has a more lateral way of speaking. It's more kind of thin and lateral, so that almost to keep the dust out of his mouth, you know, and how that affects your vocal cords, and it kind of gives you slightly more husky tones. And there's kind of a bit of a freedom to it, because yes, we think we know what cowboys sound like, but also we have no recordings of Billy the Kid. We have no idea what he sounded like. So vocally, you know, I played with a vocal coach around like, what would it mean to have grown up probably speaking in an Irish dialect, and then to move out west and to kind of gather this kind of like mix and match of all these kind of American dialects that were from all over the diaspora of immigration. And so, yeah, it was like painting. I felt like I was painting the whole time and getting to play with all these different colors. It was a total treat. Yeah.
So I loved the fact, and Tom told me this, you know, and some of the other young guys. I mean, we had a lot of young actors in the show, which is a great thing, and they'd all done prep. You know, they knew what they'd have to ride, and they'd have to ride, if they're European, they'd have to learn to ride American style, they'd have to learn to use guns and whatever. But Calgary is a real cowboy place. You know, they have cowboy shows there, and Tom himself said, I thought I was prepared until I got to Calgary and met my first cowboy.
Oh yeah.
You know, and then pretty soon, like 2 weeks later, they were out there riding in a stampede with longhorn cattle. And it was because, you know, these cowboys gave you this kind of security, because these guys are brilliant. You know, they're the real thing. Yeah. It's amazing, you know, and I love that. I love the authenticity of it. I love the fact that our show is shot in cowboy country with cowboys.
Yeah.
You know, and very little green screen.
I mean, we didn't shoot a single frame on a soundstage. Everything was on location. Every single frame.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's considering how little time we had to make it.
Yeah.
You know, it was COVID time. It was very difficult. There was no studio. You were on the move all the time. I mean, the results, and probably, actually, the result has something to do with that pressure. That you're under such pressure that you kind of do your best work, that everyone does their best work, from production, you know, all the way down, costume directors, everyone's under huge pressure. but they know what they want, and they know what and it all comes together.
We talked a lot about when we were on set. It felt like old school movie making. It really did. It felt like kind of old school run and gun. You know, they'd be like, get on the horse. There was one day where Otto needed this shot of this eagle. There's the scene where I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but young Billy at a funeral in this moment of grief looks up and sees this eagle, and you know, presumably it was going to be like a CGI kind of put in post eagle. And there's one day we're shooting something else entirely, and Otto turns around and he goes, eagle, 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 quick, go, 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 and everyone sprints over and they shoot the eagle, because it might be the only time they ever get that shot. And it was a lot of that sort of thing, kind of like very serendipitous moments of like that you could only get by being out on the prairies. There's another scene where I'm riding full gallop, and it's where I'm riding to Mexico to save Segura, which really happened. He did like a historically fast ride to Mexico, and I'm riding, and there's like 2 deer, and it's this big aerial frame, and 2 deer run across, and everyone thinks they're CGI. Everyone thinks they were put in post. They actually ran across like right in front of my horse. So things like that you can only get that sort of authenticity by actually being on the ground, doing it in that kind of like old school movie making way.
You know, so hearing like you talking about Calgary, and of course listening to you talk, those are absolutely not American accents. So here you're filming in Canada. Neither of you are born and raised in the United States, and yet you're making one of the best, most authentic and honest Westerns I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of it. Michael, like, is there like, do you think that not being from the United States establishes the Old West in a more mythic status that attracted you to it?
Well, what I would say is that almost all Americans are immigrants.
There you go.
So if we're casting Irish actors, British actors, you know, Australian actors, people from around the world, they are Americans in the show, because that's what Americans are. I mean, it puzzles me enormously that there's a certain number of Americans who've cut off from their immigrant past, but you're all American. You're all immigrants, you know, and this is a story of immigration. So it never bothered me at all that we had an English central character, an Australian, you know, Jesse Evans was an Australian actor, because this is also the story of immigration, which makes it very relevant today. You know, immigration is one of the big stories of the moment, and you know, so and I think the story, so it broadens the whole canvas. It broadens the story out into something that's very relevant, that's very contemporary. I think what you do actually when you're casting a show or a film, what you're really doing, you shouldn't have a polemical interest. You should be looking for the best actor for the role. And that could be someone from anywhere. But it just so happens that immigration is a big issue in the show. And we had immigrants, as it were, actors, immigrant actors, you know, from Australia, from Canada, from, you know, wherever they came from.
Well, and also, you know, Michael, this, you know, when you think about 1881 and, you know, the Old West like this, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, you know, you're talking like 140 years, 150 years. That's nothing. Yeah. And you're right. So that's why you're going to have like immigration be just as relevant here now in 2022 as it was, you know, back in the day. It's really something.
And of course you have, you know, the West in those days and New Mexico and so where it was an essentially very violent land. Extremely violent, that Billy was pitched into as a young boy. He first got interested in guns, I think, because his father had died, and he saw how locals in New Mexico looked at his mother, and he wanted to buy a gun to protect his mother. And of course, you know, this was a land ruled by the gun, and you'd have to say that America, how much has America changed? How civilized has America become? You know, it's like these are pertinent, relevant issues. You know, Billy had to endure that environment as a young man.
It's a coming of age, and Tom, yeah. You know, in addition to all the extensive preparation that you had to do, how did filming this series challenge you as an actor and push you physically and emotionally like nothing you have done since?
Yeah, I mean, you look for challenges as an actor. You know, it's the bread and butter of what keeps you going and what keeps you motivated. Is you want to do something that you haven't done before, and something that challenges you, and something that you want a mountain to climb. Usually, you know, the good actors anyway, I hope. And it's something that I've always been drawn to, is like, how can I challenge myself? How can this be? How can I make this tough? How can this be something that I have to overcome and understand something about myself while I'm understanding the character? And so I thought it would be mostly psychological, but there was a lot of physical challenges on set as well. You know, there's Michael put it clearly before, but you know, there's literally dust in your mouth. You know, you're writing sometimes 10 hours a day. Those scenes are, you know, we're really doing it. There were days where one day we were riding, and we were riding amongst the like 100 head of longhorn cattle, and some of them started to escape, and we didn't quite have enough wranglers to get them all. And so one of the guys was like, go. And by this point, Daniel and I had kind of ridden enough that we were pretty confident. And so we spent the day, like after each scene, helping them round up the cattle,
Wow.
which at the time, I mean, him and I just grinning the entire time, absolutely over the moon, completely stoked, because it's like, you know, a boyhood dream to get to like literally be a cowboy. And we're with these guys who do this on a daily basis for a living. And it felt incredibly authentic. But you get off, you know, and adrenaline's flowing, so you don't feel anything while you're doing it. But you get off after a day of 10 hours of that, and every cell in your body aches. And then you times that by 5 months. And, you know, I really did rely on like ice baths and salt baths by the end. I was doing them every night just to like soothe my aching bones. But again, that's how they lived. That's how Billy lived. It was a really tough life. They didn't have a comfortable mattress. They like lay out on a bed of straw most nights, you know? And then there were like forest fires in Canada, historic forest fires last summer. I ended up hospitalized at the end of a long week because I couldn't breathe because of the smoke. It was so dense. Only for one night, I was fine. But yeah, there was a moment where, you know, the fires were so bad that we were pretty concerned. Luckily, they passed after a while. But yeah, you know, basically Calgary threw every element at us that it possibly could. And they say in Calgary, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes because it just changes constantly. So you know, it was a physically demanding shoot, and psychologically, Billy really goes through the ringer. He is constantly challenged and put through his paces and put through trauma. And I have to go through that as him, and so you know, you have to take care of yourself. But also you get to know the character that way by going through what they go through. And I was lucky to have an incredible cast to go through it with, and we all bonded really, really well. And we all kind of became a family by the end. So very, very lucky.
But I do want to say, Scott, that of course, after we've seen the young Billy, Tom is in almost every scene.
Mm-hmm.
That was the challenge of a young actor carrying a new show, being in every scene, so totally exposed all the time. You know, there's no hiding place to be on that. You know, I've never written anything in which the main character is on screen all the time. You know, so you know, kudos to him. I mean, he took that challenge, absolutely met that challenge, and felt and seemed to feel more and more comfortable meeting it. You know, and so the character. I mean, we've said before that, but that's, you know, it was an organic process, because just as Billy was learning new things and going west and traveling and things, so was Tom.
Mm.
Well, bravo to both of you. Big congrats to both of you and the entire cast and crew of Billy the Kid. Big thanks to our friends at Epix for making this conversation possible. Please be sure to watch Billy the Kid on Epix or through the Epix app. Thank you again for joining us for this last half hour. Be well and all the best. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.